Thanks for coming to learn about SCORM. You're clearly our people. I'm glad you're here. I'm Chris, and this is Joe.
Hi.
We're going to walk you through a little bit of some troubleshooting SCORM like a pro. We do this all day, so a lot of these topics, there's friendly faces here in the room. Who here is new to SCORM? Okay, we got a couple hands, awesome. And I know there are some SCORM experts in here that certainly know more than me about this topic, so that's good. We have a nice crowd of differently SCORmy people. Thanks for being here. I know this isn't the most catchy title you would see on a marquee in Las Vegas, but I think for those of us who use this all day, being better at SCORM probably makes you better in your role, better at your work. So thanks for being here. We're here to help. You haven't heard of us before, probably. We're not exactly a household name, but Rusticity Software helps e-learning products play nicely together all day, every day. This is what we do. When you go down into the vendor floor and you walk booth to booth, many of those customers are quietly our customers behind the scenes. SCORM is an effective way to help things get along, and we've been doing it for a very long time. There is an ebook here that goes deeper into what this conversation will be about. We've put a lot of thought and effort into it, so if this is exciting for you, you can get the book. There will be another QR code at the end if you miss this beautiful opportunity. We are mostly 60 people kind of in Nashville. It's good to see you, welcome. And we deal with SCORM, XAPI, CMI5, LTI, AICC, PENS. There's about 15 different e-learning standards out in the world. Joe and I casually call them SCORM for the most part because we're lazy, but all of these standards, we play a role in writing, creating, stewarding. I sit on 2 different IEEE boards that are pushing XAPI and CMI5 forward, and we use these open standards as a way to help competing brands get along and do the things that practitioners actually need to do all day. So negotiating all of those relationships and dealing with all those different software companies is our sweet spot, and you should feel free to ask us anything, really. This is the only thing we know how to help anybody with. So, Joe?
I know there's some new people to SCORM, but who is actively using SCORM now?
Everyone. Yes, this is our group.
We are definitely in the right room, which is great. And I think, do we have a celebration slide?
Ta-da!
Yes! Coins. Also, my name is Joe. I work in support. I love pugs, coffee, and SCORM. Just want to throw that out there.
This is Archie, one of Joe's 2 famous dogs.
That is one of my dogs. But yeah, it's fantastic. This is what we is our bread and butter. I love talking about learning standards. I am a SCORM dinosaur. I test content probably every day of my life. So we're super happy that you're here to hear us chat about some of the trouble that could come up with SCORM. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about what SCORM is.
So if anyone in my personal life asks the unfortunate question, like, what do you do? I cringe a little bit because it goes deep fast. I think the MP3 is the easiest, most relatable example that you guys probably have, and maybe the other folks you work with who don't care at all about SCORM can understand and relate to. And if Joe and I start a band tomorrow, we can mix a song on GarageBand or Pro Tools. We can go into Nashville, Tennessee and turn all the knobs. But at the end of the day, we're in a place where you save it out as an MP3 and no one looks at me as the nerd in the band and says, hey, go program that. The authoring products save as an MP3 for us. And Rusticity is quietly behind the scenes doing that for many of the leading authoring tools that you guys probably use. Captivate, Adobe's, Storyline, Gomo, there's many out there, and we are often the SCORM bit behind the scenes just at the end when it comes to publishing. Much like an MP3, those files can then go into the world and work on almost any device with a triangle button. You can play them in a rental car, you can use them on a phone. There are other standards out in the world, but the MP3 is really old. And when it comes to this type of interoperability, it is the only time where something's age is its strength. Anybody ever heard SCORM is dead? Like, we're not going to do that anymore and we're going to move on. Like, maybe I'm trying to kill SCORM. There are other replacements for it, but how much longer will we use a PDF or an MP3? Once everybody in the world kind of decides that this is the way that it plays when you hit the triangle button, unearthing that and changing it for small reasons is very difficult. So just because SCORM is old doesn't mean it is dead. And in fact, it has a lot of analogies to other things that you interact with all day and probably don't know about. So SCORM is a lot like an MP3, but for e-learning. It plays with a beginning, a middle, an end, and an assessment, and generally rolls up time, completion, pass, fail, score, and has the metadata where it needs to be. This is not a broken problem. There are newer standards, there are advanced things that do things. I am an evangelist of those too, but if you're doing basics, this is a great way to help the other colleagues you work with kind of relate a little more to the things you grind on all day. SCORM has widespread adoption in almost every LMS across almost every authoring tool. It supports the things that we do from a traditional compliance-based training really well. Beginning, middle, end, bookmarking, all of the assessments, all the things that you guys need for traditional type of training experiences. And it plays the same way. It's not an advantage if our song, Joe, plays differently in someone's car versus their phone. That's not a good thing. SCORM should work consistently over and over. It's science. This is the way it plays. And it gives us the ability to do it on any new technology that still uses a web browser. I've seen AR, VR, XR work through SCORM packages. SCORM is pretty accommodating for something that, Joe, if you'd pulled this iPad out of your pocket 25 years ago when they were writing SCORM, they would have called you a witch and they would have made you leave the room.
Very true.
But it still works really well on new technologies. It is kept up far longer than any of us thought, but it is still very useful. So if folks try to claim that like, hey, why are you using this old thing? Well, because it has a ton of functionality in ways that other industries are still building their businesses on top of. So Joe, talk us through a little how we get better at it.
So yeah, and just to kind of, as a caveat, there are a lot, I don't want to say there are a lot of problems you could encounter using SCORM. So we're going to do our best. Like I said, I work in support as far as kind of casting a wide net, if you will, of like, these are the things we see a lot. Some of them you might have encountered, and we'll do a survey a little bit later about the last thing, or our boss battle that we're going to encounter. But we're going to start with runtime behavior, some coarse troubleshooting things that have come up. They pretty much come up a lot, many times a week for us in our support department. And so there's us running away. All right, to start, we'll take a step back. What does a course have to do at runtime? Really, technically, there's only a few things that must happen, but the first thing that's got to happen is it has to pull the LMS for the SCORM API. It has to have that common language so that it can get and set information. And there could be some trouble when you're initially getting that API. You may see that error, unable to find API adapter. Fun fact, this is the first thing 20 years ago when I started supporting SCORM. This was the Donnelly special. This was the thing that I was best at. It was the thing that I remembered. It was my touch point. And so, ironically, it is the first thing that happens in SCORM communication. Lots of things could happen. You could have a course that maybe is SCORM 2004, but is trying to speak SCORM 1.2. In the IMS manifest in the SCORM file, it actually is going to dictate what standard it's using. You could have a course that's kind of set up in a strange way. Maybe it has multiple manifests. So it could be a course problem that causes this issue. Security gets in the way. If you're launching a cross-domain course in the frame set and it is asking for the API in a different domain, that domain might say, absolutely not. We don't know who you are. We do not want to exchange information with you. Same thing with cross-domain issues. That's basically going to be any sort of reaching out to another domain to launch the content, and you start getting and setting variables. You could run into that same sort of security issue. Kind of rare, but you could run into an LMS that has misimplemented the spec. We've got a great blog post from many years ago about LMSs that only support a portion of the SCORM spec can be problematic because there are a lot of gray areas of the spec, and there's some not so gray areas that people just kind of skip over. So making sure that the LMS will offer up the API, the SCORM course can then accept it and then start talking. it's a big piece, but it is, once again, step one. And so really, there's only two things that a course has to do. It must do when it is communicating via SCORM. It has to initialize communication with the LMS. So this is me saying, I am picking up the telephone and I'm calling the LMS, and then it has to hang up the telephone and terminate communication. Those are the only two things. Everything in between, all the things we're going to talk about on the next slide and probably the slide after that, is all gravy. Those are the nice to have and really requirements in this day and age. But if you look at the spec, that's what it says you have to do. It has to basically ask for the API, receive it, and then hang up the phone. Now, I feel like there's a T-Rex next door. Or is that me? Yeah? No? Is my water tingling? Anyway. So once we get past the API and we are talking the same language, this is the first thing we dive into when we're supporting customers, because a lot of the times it's, I don't see a success status, or I don't see a score, or I don't see interactions, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So the first thing you're really going to want to do is take a look at the common runtime data and the reporting data that you want to report on. These are the things that you want to populate your reports with. Completion and success status. So statuses, well, like I said, other than them being technically optional, can be kind of tricky, because in SCORM 1.2, there was one status, lesson status, and everything piped through that. In SCORM 2004, they split it into completion and success. Completion, did I get to the end? Success status, did I master it? And so a lot of the times in LMSs, sometimes courses get confused, is you've got to figure out how to be kind of agnostic to the standard and be able to either maybe translate a success status from something. Maybe it's a score, maybe they have a mastery score in there. So making sure that if you want your learners to see completed and passed when they complete and pass a course, we need to make sure that course is published to do that. So authoring tools can help there. They have, a lot of times if you use any of the big authoring tools, they've got a tracking pair. And so that could be completed, passed. Passed incomplete is a default in most tools, which should cover everything. But you'll want to make sure your authoring tool does that. Score is another interesting one, because in some cases you can have a course that has an assessment but doesn't set a score. Maybe it's just kind of informational, or maybe it's a sort of pseudo survey. But you'll want to make sure it is scored in the manner that you want it to be. Time is very interesting, because lately we've been basically taking a lot of questions about, okay, how do I track time? And when they say time, they mean real time in training. So Chris sits down, he's taking his course, but then he pauses it. Or maybe, he pauses it to walk away to go back to do his job. He has to take some phone calls. But it's still technically running in the LMS. How do you go through and find out, okay, he had some kind of abstract downtime, but he was still in the course. How does that count? And so that's a thing that you also want to deal with both on the LMS side and the course side, making sure that the type of time that you want to report on is the type of time you're going to get. And then, does the SCORM version matter? This very much matters dependent upon the reporting data you want. We're going to talk about some other reporting data here in a couple of slides that really will flesh out why this matters, but SCORM 1.2 and SCORM 2004 are not really technically built the same. There is less data in SCORM 1.2 than there is in 2004. And that's just a fact. And so when you go through and say, oh, I'm building a course, make sure everything you report on is going to be sent by the course, one. And then two, make sure your LMS can report on it, because you could have this really rad course that sends all of this crazy data, but then you go in and look at your reports and you're like, why aren't my interactions here? Well, maybe your LMS doesn't report on them. That doesn't mean that it didn't set them, it just means you can't see them. So there's this whole kind of long-form communication between the LMS and the course, and making sure that it's doing all the things you expect. Bookmarking, it's strange. So bookmarking is still something that comes up from time to time. This is one that is near and dear to my heart. I come from a safety background, so I have taken OSHA 10, 20, and 30 hour training, and I could tell you I would be, as Chris would say, very briny if I got 28 hours into an OSHA 30 and then somehow lost my bookmark. and had to figure out how to go from there. So you'll always want to make sure your course is bookmarking, and that could mean bookmarking on a slide, bookmarking at a certain spot where you feel like they have looked at all of the information and have taken it all in, and maybe you can just at each module reset it, but it has to bookmark. It should bookmark in some way. That's just kind of a good thing to do for your learners. Believe it or not, as much as it pains me to say, sometimes the learners, like the training is not the most important thing that they want to do, but if we can make it easier and in some ways more delightful to get in there and take their training so that they can be better at their jobs and follow compliance, then anything we can do as course authors is always a good idea to knock that out. So bookmark often. If you don't know this is another thing, we'll talk about testing tools a number of times. There's a couple of repeat things. We'll go ahead and apologize ahead of time. But use a testing tool. Find out where your course bookmarks, make sure it does the thing you want it to do. And then without getting too far into the SCORMy weeds, there is a concept of exit type. CMI.exit, CMI.core.exit. We talk about this all the time, but this is going to signal to the LMS what happens when a learner relaunches. So if I'm suspending the exit, that means I am stopping the attempt at that point, and I intend to come back and relaunch it. Any exit type set to normal or nothing or null is going to indicate to the LMS that the attempt is over. When Chris relaunches workplace harassment, he's going to start from the beginning. So bookmarking, once again, just a kind thing to do as a content author. Let's talk about interactions. All right, so quiz reporting, question and answer text, super important. Not only so that you can be assessing your learners, but also you can assess your assessments to make sure you are getting everything out of your assessment that you expect to get. So you're teaching your learners. You're also teaching your content authors, because you could have courses that make perfect sense, the assessments, when you're taking them in testing, but maybe you might throw it out there and culturally the assessment isn't hitting. And you can go through and you want to do some light analytics into your courses or into your assessments to make sure they are doing the things we expect. So what can we get out of these versions of SCORM? SCORM 1.2, mostly identifiers. Sometimes not super helpful. You're going to get things like a question ID and an answer ID. That isn't going to give you very robust reporting. However, if you knew what those things were, then sure. Really, SCORM 2004 is where the robust interaction reporting comes into play, where you can get full question and answer text, where you can see questions like, where's the princess? Does anybody know where she is? She's in another castle. That was a Mario reference, thank you. So we've gone past interactions, and now let's talk about some common things that come up. And this is something that has come up a lot lately for us, and it is this concept of rollup. So the course is going to signal to the LMS that it is time to take that status data and roll it up to the aggregation level or the registration level so that the LMS can report on it. Now, in SCORM 1.2, this was all handled by the LMS. So once that set value is made to set completion status or lesson status, it's probably just going to roll up immediately or at some point with some sort of auto commit of when it's going to take dirty data and roll it up. So there's nothing really you have to do on the course side. However, SCORM 2004 put a lot of power into the hands of the course. And SCORM 2004 second and third edition in particular had a default rollup rule that can be kind of troubling for learners. So by default, if you are not setting success status, you haven't accounted for it in the manifest, or if they just leave in the middle of it, there will be a success status of failed that gets rolled up. And if I'm a learner and I have not taken an assessment, or I have exited like a good learner should to go off and do my job and come back, if I see failed in my LMS, I'm going to immediately, that's going to be a support ticket. If any of you work in support, that will be a ticket because we get them. And so there's a couple ways around this. One, SCORM 2004 4th edition, this is the easy button approach. Go back into your authoring tool, publish the 4th edition. 4th edition corrected the default rollup rules to be rollup unknown instead of failed. So while unknown still can be kind of maybe problematic for some learners, better than failed. Better than failed. You can also add rollup rules. Now this gets kind of difficult. Rollup rules and sequencing in SCORM 2004, frankly, is difficult. It is something, it's a puzzle I enjoy messing around with, but it is also something I have to relearn from time to time. There's not a ton of people that do a ton of manifest work with SCORM 2004. There's probably some of you out there that have done some, but it's not a skill that a lot of folks have. So usually going straight to 4th edition is the thing that you want to do. So we kind of touched on this on an earlier slide, cross-domain issues. Content authors are more and more wanting to host their content on their domain or in their server, in their application. And so you're going to have to account for that cross-domain piece. Cross-domain is not supported natively by SCORM. That's why AICC is still around. It does that natively. But there are ways around it. There are lots of tools out there that host their content in a way that you can communicate with your LMS via cross-domain. So once again, make sure everybody's trustworthy. Make sure you trust where your learning content's coming from, make sure your LMS trusts it, and then everybody can play nicely together. If you are launching in an iframe, then that can tend to be more problematic than a new window launch. So keep that in mind too, that you might want to pop up that browser debug and see, or the browser console, and see if there are any errors. Chances are it'll say something like access denied or some other kind of ugly message about ancestor frames. But these are types of things we see all the time, and we love to help with these sorts of things.
So I guess my piece of advice is always to test, 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 test. We have a free tool called SCORM Cloud that everyone in this room can have a free account with. I see heads. Who has a SCORM Cloud account? Almost nice. The whole room. So the ones that didn't put your hand up, everybody else is doing it. You should do it too. It is a simple place. You put your file in there, you click play, you click through your slides, and it will begin to tree out, and we will show you some of the code to have a faxer-friendly moment. You're getting a lost completion. Well, I don't know, is the course sending these things, or is the LMS not catching them? Is my learner doing something weird in their browser? SCORM Cloud is a great way to ensure that the content you're building does the things that you intended it to do, and we can prove it. And very few people like to argue with Joe about SCORM. So once we can prove it, we can share those debug logs with others, and we can actually get down to solving problems rather than pointing fingers. So SCORM Cloud is a great free place for you to come into, and we are not consultants. Ask us anything, really. We are not here to sell you a SCORM conversion and do all those things. We really enjoy solving these problems, and much like I kind of alluded to earlier, where, hey, a lot of these authoring tools are actually our clients, and we're doing the SCORMy bits for them. On the other side of the coin, many of the learning management systems that you're probably using are running our player under the hood. And that player is identical to what you're testing in SCORM Cloud. And it can be a great faxer-friendly moment for you to go in and begin to understand, is my package doing something weird, or are my systems doing something strange? Joe, talk us through the hardest part.
This is the hardest part. I'm not going to steal any thunder from Chris, who has another slide after this, because I know my slides. But the lost completion. It is the hardest thing we deal with in support. And what we're talking about here is a learner has taken a course, they've completed it, they can see on their, at the end of their course, they've completed it, I'm at the end, Chris got a 90 in workplace harassment, he got it, he passed. They exit the course, or maybe they don't exit the course, and then they have no record in the LMS that they ever completed it. It is the single most, I often say this is the reason why I'm still doing support, because it's a thing that comes up a lot, and it is a hard problem to solve, and it is something that I know LMS vendors, us as eLearning standards experts, we have tried our best to get to the point to where you can minimize that risk. And we do have some ways that we usually advise to minimize that risk. But before we do that, we're gonna try to get the boss there.
Anybody run into lost completions at their job regularly? Cool. I'm curious, anybody have greater than 50% lost completions? Good. That would be
goodness.
terrible. Who's down to like 25, 1 out of 4 fails? Cool, 10%. Rule of thumb, if you are below 1%, you get a medal. So something weird happens between the keyboard and the chair, and that's going to account for humans doing strange things about 1% of the time. But if you are getting lost completions over 1% on a regular basis, you should talk to Joe.
Yeah.
That we can beat those problems down. There are ways to put some rigor to what you're doing and stop that. So lost completions aren't impossible to get rid of completely, but if you are experiencing greater than 1%, that's really something we can work on. Unfortunately, 1% when you're launching 100 million courses a year for some of our clients is still a ton of people. So we have to do everything we can, and the bigger your scale, the bigger these problems begin to matter and cascade.
Yeah, it's hard, and like I've often also said that 20 years ago when I first started supporting SCORM, you were less than 2%. You're doing it. That number doesn't fly anymore for a lot of folks, especially if you have a ton of learners. So we tend to look at this lost completion problem in a couple of ways. I like to kind of separate course side things to LMS side things, and then there's a couple things that mingle in between. But there are some things you can do on both sides to help minimize that risk, because like Chris said, as much as it pains me to say a 0% failure rate is going to be very hard, mainly because of that learner, because that's the one thing we cannot control. Most other things we can, and we can find ways to do that. But the learner, they're going to do what they're going to do, and so there are some things that we can do at the course side of things to minimize that risk. All right. I'm going to use this first one a couple of times. I'm going to go ahead and warn you. I'm probably going to say it 2 more times. Have an exit button.
An exit button?
An exit button.
Great.
A clear way out. You can say whatever you want, complete course. You can say exit. You can put bright lights around it. You can put an arrow up to it that puts the learner up there. You can put something scary on that slide that says, if you want credit for this course, click this button. Which I see some people nodding like that's a thing that you do. But giving the learner a clear way to know how to leave. But not only that, have an exit button that does the thing it needs to do so that it can, in effect, put all of its books back on the shelf and set the status it needs to do. Actually, the status hopefully is already done at that point, but do all the things it needs to do before it terminates so that the LMS can receive that information and then do something with it. Good communication. This is for the content authors. Make sure those learners know exactly what to do to complete a course. Do I have to click every slide? Do I have to do something like turn cards or listen to an MP3 or watch an entire video? Make sure they know exactly what they need to do on every slide, pass the assessment with X score, so that there's no challenges of going back through and saying, oh, well, this person got to the end, and now we're sitting here going, oh, well, but it's only showing that they did 70% of the course. And so then you'd have to kind of maybe go back through those slides and say, well, you didn't do something, and figure it out from there. Never set completion on exit. So with that exit button underneath it, try not to set completion there. Reason being, a lot of people are launching the frame set these days or an iframe because they're launching mobile courses, or they want that look that they're not leaving the LMS, that they're they're basically at their home base. If you were to set completion on exit, there's a chance in both the new window and frame set scenario that you are going to be setting completion while the player's already gone. The player has gone, the course is trying to tell it something, and it has nowhere to go. So staying away from that and maybe setting it a little bit earlier in the course is always a good plan. I like to use a results page. I know I like to get the warm and fuzzies when I know I get a 90 on a course, or better yet, 100. And so giving them something that says, hey, this is what you've done, you've completed it, you've got a 100. Maybe even you set completion on that page before you go to a summary. But giving them something to know that they have gone. I'm going to go ahead and say it because we all know that, once again, lost completions are not something you're not ever going to not see. It's also good for them to maybe take a picture of it, just in case you do run into a lot of problems. It's like an extra layer of, listen, Chris, I really did my training, and I really got a 100. I promise you I'm not lying. And then the exit type. We touched on this before. In a situation where you're running into a lot of different completion problems, setting suspend for your exit type is going to be a good idea, because most courses, most LMSs, a lot of content players will give you the option to relaunch a course, and a lot of times that relaunch will trigger that completion again. So if it didn't pop the first time, it should pop the second time. That normal or nothing exit will end up resetting your launch. And so that's, once again, in the very melodramatic OSHA 30 example, oh my, I don't want to be around for that. Oh, we made it. Okay, now that we've talked a little bit about core stuff, we can kind of separate it into the mindset of what we're looking at when we run into these types of problems. I think of it in two questions. Has anybody completed it, or has some people completed it? If no one has completed it, I almost always will go straight to SCORM Cloud or your favorite testing tool or your LMS tool and test there. If you can't complete it, then it's a course problem. Take it back to the authoring tool. Almost every time. If you don't launch, if you don't use SCORM Cloud or some other authoring tool, check your browser console. A lot of courses will have a nice bit of logging in the console that you can look at. And lastly, hopefully your LMS will have some bit of logging that you have access to. Maybe it's an API endpoint you can hit to grab all that data back, so you can see exactly what the course is setting and then how the LMS is responding. Those things are really super important. But if no one's, once again, if no one's completed it, it's probably a course problem or a very catastrophic LMS problem, which hopefully we don't see. Or if some of them, it's probably some combination of between the player, the LMS, and maybe the learner. All right, so what does it look like?
Code.
Look at this. This is beautiful, isn't it?
Really exciting code, right?
Yeah.
A good best slide
Fun.
of the day.
Debug logs.
Yeah.
So what does it look like when no one has a completion? So this is just a very simple example of some runtime data. The top box, you can see the course is setting a score. Great. It correctly does that. Now, sometime after or sometime before, I would expect to see a set value for completion or success status. I'm not seeing it. The good news is I am seeing a terminate, which is great. However, this course is not setting a status at all. So I would not expect to see anything but a score. This is a SCORM 2004 course. I would see an 80, incomplete, failed, which would be probably super confusing for a learner. But it does call terminate, so that's great, but it doesn't get us all the way there. What it should look like is this. Notice we have a bunch of different stuff in there, but right up there, we see our completed and passed. We have our score a little bit further down, and then if we really want to get in the weeds, we have our ADL nav request for SCORM 2004, which is important for rolling up and triggering rollup in the LMS, and terminate. So this is really what it should look like. If you test in SCORM Cloud, or even if you don't and you have problems deciphering this, this is what our support department does. Happy to talk to any of you about how we do things, give you a card, however. But this is my bread and butter. This is what I like doing all day.
These are actually screenshots from SCORM Cloud itself. So once you play a course, there is a debug log button that trees these out. You'll notice the very last line is a shareable link that you can just send to support@scorm.com, which will go to Joe, and he will tell you why this is broken. I'm a failed developer by trade, and I can kind of figure this out, but Joe's really handy. Yeah, shoot. Oh yeah, if you don't have issues, we'll just love to hear from you. But,
you want to chat, hang out?
Ask us anything really is the best way to express it, and we are successful when you are successful, again, because I probably have a client on each side of that coin, and if one of their tools is fundamentally broken, this is how we go support it before they realize they need it. So it creates magic. The more you ask, the more help you bring us in to solve, the better we help this whole conference play nicely with green check marks and data.
One of the things I'm most thankful for working at Recipe Software is when I started 17 and a half years ago, is moving from this culture of no, you don't pay us any money, we're not going to support you, to we want to make sure that everything is working well for you, even if you don't use one of our products.
Yeah.
Because it just, you're right, Chris is right, you might be using an LMS that we actually provide a player for, or you might use an authoring tool that we are kind of in the plumbing for. So yeah, please, ask us anything. It's a wonderful thing. It's free.
Millions of launches a month through SCORM Cloud, and many of those folks ask questions every day, and we answer them with full delight. So yep. You found the one thing in the world we can actually help people with. Don't be shy. Ask us a lot of questions.
And it's not just me, there are a couple other people too.
His brother.
So my brother works in support with it.
It's a real small team.
All right, so hey, exit buttons, right? I told you you'd hear it at least one more time. So one of the main causes of any sort of a roll-up problem is either the lack of an exit button or some sort of bad exit. A bad exit could be, I don't have my phone's over there, but I usually will pick it up and say, put it to sleep, put it back in my pocket when I'm taking training. You're not actually exiting. It's still in session. And so that is going to cause, well, a bunch of different problems. It could cause a lost completion. You could still be in training and maybe not look at it until Monday. And you've got now 60 hours of training, or 60 hours of time in training, which is going to mess up the reporting. And nobody's going to love that because, once again, time is important, especially when you're paying people for their training. Yeah. Learner closes the laptop without exiting, same sort of thing. I'm doing my training Friday night. I finish it, close my laptop, reopen it Monday morning, and I was like, oh great, I'm still on this last page. That's, anything wacky can happen there. Like it could not roll up, it could not do a number of things. And mobile learners, I feel like I've been in the space long enough to see, there are a couple of people using mobile devices to now, my older kids taking their college classes on mobile devices, which still kind of sort of pains me, but it's okay. They got through. But mobile launches are different. They are a little bit dicier when you unload a mobile browser. So this is where you'll want to launch it in a frame set, which means I would definitely have an exit button. So it all kind of comes back together. Frame sets, exit buttons mean good exits in most cases, if your learner's playing ball. Okay, so once again, if some folks, and this is kind of a summary page, if some folks have survived the boss battle, they've got their completion, but others do not. Maybe you've got your 1 or 2 out of 20, like Samantha was telling about us beforehand. What are the things that you want to look at? SCORM 2004 versus SCORM 1.2. Once again, SCORM 2004 is a little bit heavier with what a course must do at exit to signal to roll up to happen. SCORM 1.2 is a little easier if you had a situation where like you needed a quick and dirty fix. I don't want to change from SCORM 2004, or I can change from SCORM 2004 because I don't need interaction data. Sometimes moving to 1.2, even with it being 20-something years old, 26, it's kind of consistent that way because those set values, once again, are going to roll up immediately. How are you launching the course? Once again, it all kind of goes together. If you're in an iframe, exit button. If you're in a new window, that can be kind of a little bit easier, where if you didn't have an exit button, it's fine, but really have an exit button.
Exit button? Joe loves exit buttons.
I do love exit buttons.
I guess we also skipped over a pretty fundamental detail that I know all the time, but maybe some of the folks don't. There are a bunch of versions of SCORM, and they all hate each other, and there's no backwards compatibility among any of them. So SCORM 1.2 is the most common used anywhere in the world. If someone just casually talks to either one of us just about SCORM, I just assume it's 1.2, and I'm usually right. Yep. In SCORM Cloud, greater than 75% of all the content uploaded today will be SCORM 1.2. It is very common. It does the basics really well. Beginning, middle, end, big 4, time, completion, pass, fail, score are the things. And if you're not doing any non-linear paths through content and tracking some advanced things and doing cool stuff, and you just need a death by PowerPoint with a quiz at the end that you can prove it, hey, SCORM 1.2 is the oldest version, but it is actually one of the most used and stable. SCORM 2004 comes in 3 different editions, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, because nothing in my life is easy. And 3rd and 4th are really the ones you want to stick to day in and day out. I'm a kid of the 80s. I used to read like these paperback novels called A Choose Your Own Adventure. The author had to create the whole book, but you give some folks a moment. Hey, if the road looks safer, go to page 95. If you want to climb the tree, go to page 102. SCORM 2004 has those type of moments, and if you're interested in that stuff, hey, that is where it makes sense to get like the juice is worth the squeeze. If you're doing pre-test, post-test, crazy roll-ups, choose your own adventures, use SCORM 2004. It's not the type of madness in tech that most of us, and I know Joe and I always try to, like, I'm going to use the latest version because that puts me through this continuum, this curve further, and will last longer. Probably not. SCORM 1.2 is probably what you need until it doesn't do all the magic you need it to do, in which case go look at SCORM 2004 3rd or 4th. But if you're still using the SCORM 1.2 today, and maybe you're in Moodle because that's all it supports, it's okay. You're going to be fine. You don't need to go advance this thing for the fun of it. Advance it because you need it.
All right, so to summarize.
An exit button. Again?
Can you believe it? A 4th time about exit buttons, I think enough.
Exit buttons.
Results,
Yay.
results pages. Once again, in summary, results pages, be clear with your learners what you expect of them. And they'll reward you with hopefully good assessment scores. Launching the frame set of mobile, once again, it is imperative for the exit button to happen. And lastly, a thing we haven't talked about is if your LMS or your player has an update available, it's always good to try to stay up with what they're doing. Granted, while SCORM hasn't changed, there could be ways with how they are performing, their performance, security. There could be differences in how they're treating specific courses and how they treat specific course behaviors, because things come up, as we've talked about. And a lot of the times an LMS can help minimize that risk, whether it's a lost completion or any of the other problems we talked about. Maybe they add a setting or a switch that helps you get around some of these things. So keeping the player updated is a good idea.
We have a lot of customers where we update our software, their player behind the scenes, but they go, oh, 5 of my clients hosted themselves, and they haven't upgraded in 3 years. So that's kind of what Joe means. Like, the LMS would desperately like you want to upgrade, and we would like you to upgrade, and sometimes you got to go click that button. So.
Yeah. And I think, yes.
Ta-da.
Oh yeah, high five. Oop, wrong one. Boom.
We practiced that.
We practiced that all morning.
More than
the slides themselves.
Do you want me to take a video of it for you?
No, it's okay. The moment is past. we have it immortalized.
Thank you
my
so
pleasure.
much.
Thank
I'll
you.
be at your booth.
Did you have a question?
Yeah.